I was trying to make a decision at that time whether this lady was going to recover and she didn't qualify for a liver transplant because you can't get a liver transplant when you're drinking a fifth of vodka a day. I am not rooting for the Rangers.
Well, that's the second point.
Of course not, you called it Nevada.
There you go.
Leave our expert alone.
I'll get it wrong again.
Get that taser.
And for the record, we would move into evidence what was referenced as Exhibit 12 to Mr. Aiken's deposition. It would be Plaintiff's new Exhibit 790, and it is the photo of the sink with the Dixie cups on the side that was referenced.
Didn't you guys put the name during that meeting? Or is it a different photo?
It's a different photo. I just want the one that's referenced in the Aiken.
What was the number again, Eric?
It's Plaintiff's Exhibit 790. It's a new one added on at the end.
Objection.
Shall be admitted.
May I approach the clerk, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay. Ready to go, Your Honor?
Yes, we are, sir.
All right. Claim calls Dr. Hutson as next witness.
I think he's in the hallway. I think he's in the hallway, Marshal.
Cautious as you ascend. Put your stuff down. Stand face Madam Clerk, raise your right hand, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
May I have you state and spell your name for the record?
William R. Hutson, Hutson.
Thank you.
Please have a seat. Be cautious that yours only.
Thank you, Marshal. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Sorry, good morning.
All right, good enough. Good afternoon, Dr. Hutson. How are you?
Good afternoon, Mr. Parker.
Let me introduce you to our jury here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Dr. Hutson has traveled from West Virginia to come join us in this case. So, Dr. Hutson, how are you enjoying our weather?
It's great.
Nice, isn't it?
Very nice.
That's what I thought you'd say. I went to Virginia, West Virginia, during your deposition.
You did.
I might prefer this weather.
It's nice there now, though.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right. So, Dr. Hutson, let's start out with informing the jury about your credentials, okay? So tell me where you went to school.
I actually went to West Virginia University for undergrad and medical school.
And after, well, you know something? This is a first, I believe, in terms of all of our experts. What was your undergrad degree in?
Chemistry.
That word chemistry has come up many times, from the inventor of real water, not being a chemist, and in fact, I think flunking chemistry, to now having someone who actually has a degree in chemistry.
I didn't flunk it.
Good. And after receiving your chemistry degree, you got your medical degree.
Correct.
And after receiving your medical degree, what did you do?
I went to residency,
And where?
and that was at Charleston Area Medical Center, which was a affiliation of West Virginia University.
And after that?
After that, I went to my fellowship in gastroenterology, 3-year fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center.
And
It's my understanding you have several certifications. Can you give us a Reader's Digest version of those certifications?
I do. There are societies that you can have the privilege of joining when you're a gastroenterologist and hepatologist, and I spend the bulk of my time doing hepatology, and mainly transplant hepatology, in fact. So I joined the AGA first, which is American Gastroenterological Association. And when you have certain credentials, you publish a lot of papers and you present at national meetings and things like that, you have the opportunity to become a fellow. So a fellow is like the top 5 or 10% of the entire organization. So it's a very prestigious thing, and I feel very lucky to have it. So I'm a fellow in the AGA, American Gastroenterological Association. And then a few years after that, I also joined the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease. We all have these long names, but and that's a institution that's a little more difficult to even join and more difficult to achieve fellowship in it. But after a few years, I was able to achieve fellowship in that as well. So, and that's the top 5 or 10% of people in that organization. So. I feel very fortunate to have those credentials.
Can you tell us the difference between a gastroenterologist and a hepatologist?
Well, every gastroenterologist gets some training in liver disease, but I had additional training, and my additional training was at the University of Pittsburgh, where I served on the liver transplant team. And at that time, when I was a fellow, it was the largest liver transplant program in the world. We were doing over 550 liver transplants per year. Nobody even comes close to that nowadays because a lot more liver transplant programs have opened up, and there's a lot more people throughout the United States and throughout the world that do liver transplants. I have that extra expertise in liver disease and liver transplant as well.
It's my understanding, in addition to West Virginia, you've also, was at University Health Center for Pittsburgh, you've also had some introduction or familiarity with the Harvard Medical School.
I did. I took a special leadership course there in academic physicians, when was that, last year or 2 years ago. And that was something that I was invited to also, and it was really nice. Yeah.
It's my understanding that you've had licenses in several states, medical licenses. Is that correct? Which ones have you had licenses in, and which one do you still have a license in?
West Virginia is the only license I still have, but I have licenses in Pennsylvania, Utah, Nevada, because I spent some time here trying to build a liver transplant program.
The judges look at you because when you're here, you got to say Nevada.
Otherwise, everyone gives you the side eye. They may even throw you out.
I'll protect you for a little while. I can protect it
Within this court.
But if you go outside the court saying that, I don't even say it.
Maybe I should abbreviate it. NV.
Okay.
And then Maryland, and then back to West Virginia.
And it's my understanding, in terms of employment history, you've had several academic appointments.
I have.
And so that would be you acting as a professor or a teacher.
That's correct.
Can
I've
you
been throughout my career associated only with medical schools.
And can you give us some of the schools you've taught?
University of Pittsburgh, and then University of Utah, and then back to the University of Pittsburgh, and then back to the University of Utah. So I did 2 stints in Pittsburgh and 2 stints in Utah, and then University of Maryland, and then West Virginia University.
It's my understanding that you've received several awards. I don't want to go through them. It's a very long list. So what I thought we'd do is go through the ones just most recently, the last couple of years. Do you recall receiving an honor from the State Assembly of Maryland?
I do.
Can you describe that to the jury?
That was actually a very nice honor from the State Assembly for the work that we did at the University of Maryland for increasing access to liver transplantation for the residents of Maryland, and in particular, the underprivileged residents of Maryland that really have not been given a chance. The urbanites, to say, the urban downtown population that really have been ignored for years, and we worked really hard to try to bring the underprivileged population up to where everybody else had a fair chance for liver transplant. And me and my team was honored for doing that.
Is that an expensive procedure?
It's very expensive.
Is it difficult to even receive a transplant?
Well, it's difficult to qualify first, and then it's very difficult to receive it because we have a liver transplant list that is about 10,000 people on it, United States wide. And we do about 7,000, sometimes 8,000 liver transplants per year. So there's way more people on the list than there are available livers. So it's difficult to get one.
So if you're in the unfortunate position of being placed on a liver transplant list because you have acute liver failure, how probable or how optimistic can you be to actually get a liver before your liver fails?
Well, the acute liver failures have an advantage, and that is built into the system. It's been built into the system for many years. So if you have acute liver failure, you automatically qualify to be status 1. Status 1 is the top listing for anybody in the country. So if you're status 1, you can draw a liver from anywhere in the United States. It's not just region. UNOS is the United Network of Organ Sharing, and they govern all of the liver transplants throughout the US. So every center has a region. So usually we just draw from that region. So if you're not an acute liver failure, if you're a chronic liver disease like from drinking too much alcohol or hepatitis C, you'll go on the list, but you're really only going to draw livers from your region that you're in. And there's 10 regions in the United States. If you're an acute liver failure, you go to the top of the list for the entire United States. So you will get a liver if you're an acute liver failure. It's pretty rare that people with ALF do not get a liver.
And then at that point, you're just concerned that, one, the liver works for you,
Correct.
and two, you can afford it, you have access to it, I'm assuming. And then you have a recovery period, I'm assuming.
Correct.
So how major or minor is a liver transplant procedure?
Well, it's huge. If you talk to most any surgeon, and it doesn't just have to be a hepatobiliary surgeon, they will tell you the most challenging transplant or the most challenging surgery that anybody does is a liver transplant. It's more challenging than lung transplants, more challenging than heart transplants because you have multiple vascular and non-vascular hookups to make. You have 4 separate hookups you have to do from the body to hook the liver back up when you put it in. So it's critical that that's all done in a timely fashion and it's also done correctly.
Looking at percentages in terms of failed versus positive outcomes, is there a percentage in terms of liver transplants?
There is. Fortunately, people do very well with the transplant surgery itself. It's unusual somebody does not make it off the table. And that's pretty much throughout the United States. We track this in UNOS. We know exactly how many times that happened. It's rare because our surgeons have gotten so good and our operative techniques have gotten so good that people do well. Now, where the problem lies in is after the operation, because then sometimes people can clot off the portal vein or they can clot off the hepatic artery or their biliary system doesn't work, and then that results in a certain number of people that don't make it. But still, having said that, your 1-year survival for liver transplantation is about 91% in the United States and Western Europe. Which if you think about it, in an operation this huge, it may take anywhere between 4 and 12 hours. It's pretty good results.
So is it fair to say, Dr. Hutson, that when faced with the prospect of having a liver transplant, that's something that no one looks forward to, I would say?
That is correct.
And it is a serious and difficult procedure.
Serious, difficult, and recovery is difficult.
Now, you were also honored with the Fellowship of American Association for the Study of Liver Disease. What does that mean?
Well, that's the same institution I was talking about before, ASLD.
Got it.
Yeah.
And we'll get to this later, but in terms of a study of liver disease, what does that entail?
Well, it's really just the name of the institution itself because, this institution is made up of all hepatologists and surgeons that deal with hepatobiliary issues, and that's hepatobiliary liver and biliary tree, and then transplant surgeons. So that's sort of the population of the ASLD. So they named it that to say, well, we're an organization that not only does these things, but we study what we do.
Okay.
We produce papers, we produce abstracts, we produce oral presentations.
So there's a research component to this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you do any research?
I do.
2020, you were awarded the America's Best Doctors Award, as well as in 2021, as a matter of fact.
Correct.
What does it take to qualify for such an award?
Well, it's a nomination by not only your peers, but also by patients. So both of that goes into it. So you have to have a certain amount of, I don't know, oomph, I guess I would call it, to sort of attain one of those awards.
Yes, sir. And then finally, last year, Top Doctors Award in Gastroenterology. Similar in terms of being able to qualify for that type of award?
Yes, sir.
Now, what I won't do is go through all of your publications, because from my count, there's a lot.
Yes, sir.
Your resume is 50 some odd pages long, 54 to be exact. And from my count, you have at least 54 peer-reviewed articles.
That's correct.
What is a peer-reviewed article?
When you get a peer-reviewed article, it means that that has gone through editorial review by the publication itself, and that editorial review involves at least 3 reviewers that are physicians, and usually they're experienced physicians in academic medicine. They review your paper, they look at your statistics, they look at the quality of your work, and they have to approve it before you can get published.
And I see you've done at least 73 non-peer-reviewed articles.
That's correct.
And is it fair to say that these peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed articles all deal with your field of medicine?
They do.
And that would be in gastroenterology as well as hepatology.
Correct.
And just to bring it full circle, the reason we're all here, the reason why this jury is here, is because this case involves issues of the liver, correct? And is it fair to say that in terms of all of our plaintiffs, and some of them are here now, you've reviewed all of the medical records on our plaintiffs?
I have.
And it's my understanding that in addition to reviewing their medical records, you've reviewed their fact sheets, is that correct?
I have.
Have you reviewed their, the FDA documentation in this case?
I have.
The CDC documentation?
I have.
The Southern Nevada Health District documentation?
I have.
It's my understanding you've reviewed articles on hydrazine,
Correct.
and you've reviewed the depositions of all of the plaintiffs, is that correct?
Correct.
Based upon your experience, your education, and your review of these documents, have you formulated opinions in this case?
I have.
Let me have you go through these opinions one by one, and then we're going to get to how you got these opinions, okay? So in terms of Mr. Hughes, James Hughes, did you arrive at an opinion or a conclusion in terms of what caused his acute liver failure?
I did.
And in your opinion, based upon your evaluation of the documentation we discussed, what caused Mr. Hughes acute liver failure?
Ingestion of real water.
So him drinking real water caused it.
Yes,
Would your opinion be the same for Mr. Richard Belsky?
it is the same.
Would it be the same for Kathleen Ryerson? We know she passed away, correct?
Yes, sir.
In terms of her death, and you've reviewed her death certificate,
I
correct?
have. And spoken with her sisters.
And her sisters, by the way, have testified in this case. Is your understanding that she died of acute liver failure, correct?
She did.
Do you have an opinion or conclusion as to what caused her death?
Drinking real water.
And in terms of Mr. Keith Healy's acute liver failure, what caused that?
Drinking real water.
Would the same be true with Yvonne Arnell?
Yes, sir.
And would the same be true of young Orion Gallagher?
Yes, sir.
And then finally, would the same be true of Mr. Jeremy Baptiste?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, I'd like to put on the screen a slide of each of the plaintiffs, which has their hospitalization dates, the AST, ALT scores, as well as their water consumption information in accordance with NRS 52.275. All the documents have been produced. And I believe that.
And is that the summary statute?
That is a summary statute, John.
Your Honor, we haven't seen this before, it'd be nice to preview it. The public have no objection.
You know, Your Honor, I'm glad I came prepared.
Nice to see it a few seconds before it goes up
I
to,
think you've seen it before.
maybe, I don't know.
You've seen it from the podium.
What's that?
I'm sure you've seen it from the podium.
Good enough. There you go. You good?
Scott, you,
He said he's good.
Thank you, though.
It's
Do you need to keep?
Yes, it is. I'm not asking to be admitted as an exhibit.
All right,
It's just
thank
to
you.
facilitate the discussion. You good?
Yes.
Rob?
No objection.
Okay. All right. So can you see that on your screen, Dr.
I can.
Hanson? Perfect. So we have a picture of the client name, the hospitalization dates, the AST, ALT, and the water consumption, real water consumption amounts. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Now, is it fair to say, Dr. Hutson, that I know you spoke to Kathleen Ryerson's sisters, but did you also speak to each of the other plaintiffs?
I did.
And does this document reflect your understanding of the dates they were in the hospital, their AST, ALT scores, as well as their water consumption?
Yes, sir.
And is it fair to say that from your review of the medical records, this information is consistent with what your recollection of your conversations with each of the plaintiffs?
It is consistent.
Based upon this information, did you, again, come to the conclusions we just discussed?
Yes, sir, I did.
Good. Now let's talk about how we got there. In addition to speaking to each of the plaintiffs and Ms. Ryerson's sisters, it's my understanding, Doctor, that you also reviewed the Loma Linda University report. Do you remember that?
I did.
And you also reviewed the FDA documents, the CDC documents, and I didn't mention this one, but the Eurofins documents.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we'll take each one of them briefly. And we'll start with the FDA documents. And this is Exhibit 5. I believe this has been pre-admitted. Tori, is that correct?
Yes.
It's on the screen right now. And doctor, if you can see it from there, that's great. If you need to get up and point to it here, that's fine. But let's start and see if you need to step down from this thing. This FDA report is dated October 20th, 2021, correct?
That is correct.
And from your review of this document, did the FDA find hydrazine in 2 of the 3 concentrates it reviewed? And I'll have you take this to page 6 of this exhibit.
That is correct.
And the second paragraph there says hydrazine was identified in the liquid portions, and it gives they identify where these samples came from. And it says the concentration of hydrazine was determined to be 1.44 and 1.75, respectively. Do you see that?
That is correct.
Now, given your review of this case, your evaluation of the documents, did you find any other toxin other than hydrazine that would be responsible for the plaintiff's acute liver injury and Ms. Ryerson's death?
No, sir, and they did extensive testing.
Yes, sir. And when you saw this in the identification of hydrazine, did you know as a hepatologist that hydrazine was toxic to the liver?
I did.
And when you found that the FDA determined that hydrazine was in the concentrate, did it make sense to you that the acute liver failure suffered by the plaintiffs were related to the hydrazine consumption?
Yes, sir.
Now, and this is somewhat in chronological order, so we're going to go to the Loma Linda report. This is Exhibit 8. Tell me about this article.
This article involved 4 patients that they had admitted to Loma Linda that all had acute liver injury or acute liver failure. There's a difference between the two, but there were 4 of them, and fortunately, they did not at first know what was happening or why these people had liver failure, but they were all clustered fairly close together. So they were able to figure out that they were taking some alkalized water product. And because these people were so sick, they did liver biopsies on them. When we don't do liver biopsies all that often, even in acute liver failure, because once you get acute liver failure, the results of the liver biopsy usually don't change your management. You're going to manage the patient the same way, either medically in the ICU or they need a liver transplant. So the etiology of that acute liver failure becomes less important in the urgent situation. But because these people were relatively stable, they were all sick, but they're relatively stable, and I think they really wanted to find out, since the cluster was pretty close together, they wanted to find out, well, can we find out what's going on with these patients? So they did liver biopsies. And each of the liver biopsies showed abnormalities that were consistent with a drug-induced liver injury. We call it DILI, D-I-L-I. So the drug-induced liver injury has fairly characteristic things that you can see on the liver biopsy, and every pathologist can recognize that. And as a hepatologist, I can recognize that too. So they identified that, and then even further, what was worrisome about these is that 2 of the patients had significant scarring. One of the patients had sort of minimal scarring, and then another patient had a scarring called bridging fibrosis.
So let's take a look at that. We stop
Okay.
you for 1 second.
Sure.
Shane, can you go to the last page of Exhibit 8, page 3? Perfect. Doctor, and I hate to impose upon you, but if you could, and I don't have the wand. for
I'll
some
use
reason.
my hand.
Okay. Judge, is that okay?
That's right. Yeah, that's fine.
Always ask permission, because Marshall's ready with the tape.
My fault.
He's right there with the tape.
Thank you.
All right. So, and you've explained this to me, and you kind of took me to school. So let's take the jury to school on what fibrosis is, what's bridging fibrosis, what's necrosis, and what's bridging necrosis. Explain it to me.
Okay. And good thing I'm a professor, right? Because I like to teach. So, and I taught him. He's much smarter now. So these are 3 of the biopsies right here. Well, actually 4. All 4 are here. So what the important things on this biopsy, and I don't expect you guys to understand each of the particular details, but you're a smart jury, so I can point out things. You see where all this pink stuff and blue stuff sort of comes together? That's a lot of inflammation, and that's called hepatitis. And it's also not only hepatitis, but it's necrosis. Necrosis is when liver cells die. So you shouldn't see see this right here? This is more what the liver should look like right here, because there are different parts of the liver can look different everywhere. So right there, if you were to look at a normal liver, look at that small part right there. The cells look kind of orderly, right? They're sort of in a circular pattern. That's what the liver normally looks like. But when you get down here, you see all this pink stuff that's coalesced together, and you see a lot of these blue cells. The blue cells are all the inflammation going on. So the liver is really damaged, really, really damaged, severe damage of the liver. And here, this liver isn't quite as damaged, and each one of these patients had a little bit of difference between them about what the damage was. So you can see over here, this looks pretty normal over here, right? I mean, that's kind of a normal looking part of the liver, a small part of it. But then you see all this here. All this stuff is necrosis of the liver. So that's where the hydrazine did all the damage. It attacked the liver, and it caused the liver to crump. And so all this is inflammation and necrosis. So necrosis is dead cells, remember? This is the higher powered view here, and this shows some of these. See these big cells here that have the clear space around them? Those are hepatocytes. Hepatocytes are the main liver cells. Hepatocytes are ballooned. We call that ballooning degeneration. Hepatocytes should look more like, see this one right here? That's a fairly normal looking hepatocyte. Look how different that is. This is all ballooned up. That's necrosis. Okay, that's the liver being attacked, the liver cells being attacked. So they blow up and then eventually they explode and they sort of dissipate. And then they can either end up like this with all these inflammatory cells, and I'll get to the other part here in a minute, or they can go another direction. And this also, these two biopsies are from two different patients, but sort of similar findings. You see this yellow stuff here? Can you guys see that? That's called cholestasis, and that's where the bile duct, the biliary tree cannot get rid of bile. And that also means a lot of damage to the liver, a ton of damage to the liver when you see, yeah, that shows it nicely. So all that yellow stuff is cholestasis, bad stuff. You don't want cholestasis. Now, I think this is the two most important parts of these 4 biopsies. You guys can see the color difference here. This is called an H&E stain. Both of these are H&E stains. It's pretty typical what we do in medicine on these on the liver. But you see all this blue, and you see all this blue. Blue's bad. B is B and B. Blue is bad. Blue means scar. All right? So this person here, the scarring's not so bad here. You see most of the scarring. You guys can see most of the scarring's around the hepatocytes, right? That's called sinusoidal fibrosis. So it's in the sinusoid. The sinusoids are the spaces between our liver cells. So this is significant, but not nearly as bad as this one. This one has lots more blue. You've got a portal tract right here. Okay, there's 2 different central areas of the liver, the portal tract and the central vein. Okay, the central vein is where the blood from our body goes out, and then the portal vein is where the blood comes in from the gut, okay, through the portal vein. So here's a portal tract right here, and right down here is a hepatic vein. So the 2 different things. All that is scarred between there. That's called bridging fibrosis. Bad. Bridging fibrosis oftentimes does not heal. We don't know what's going to happen with this right now. We don't know what's going to happen with this. This part here is fully reversible, maybe. This part is not fully reversible. This may stay the same or it may get worse. If this gets worse, it goes on to cirrhosis of the liver.
So and let's stop right there. I want you to stay where you are. But let's discuss this for a second. The difference between necrosis versus fibrosis. Necrosis, you said, doctor, is dead hepatic cells.
Dead hepatocytes. Hepatocytes under attack.
Now, you told me a story that I thought was very instructive of the recovery possibility for necrosis versus fibrosis. Could you tell that story to the jury so they can understand the difference between necrosis and fibrosis?
The young alcoholic lady I told
Yes.
you about? Okay, so the necrosis, again, to sort of emphasize what that is, it's liver cell death. And I gave Mr. Parker an example. You know, since I've been doing this 30 years, I've seen a lot and done thousands of liver transplants by now. I mean, I don't do them. Remember, I'm a transplant hepatologist, so I'm the medical part of it. But I've been in the OR lots of times and put my hand in on the liver because I'm a frustrated surgeon, I guess. So, you know, I like that stuff. But pretty much what I told Mr. Parker was that the ability of the liver to recover is amazing, but not everybody recovers. The example I gave him, I had a patient that came in. She was only 30-some years old a few years ago. Terrible alcoholic hepatitis, okay? Was drinking a fifth a day of vodka. And so she got very, very sick. And so I was trying to make a decision at that time whether this lady was going to recover and she didn't qualify for a liver transplant because you can't get a liver transplant when you're drinking a fifth of vodka a day. That's not going to happen. So I biopsied her liver because I wanted to see what was going on and whether she would even recover. And her biopsy makes this one look like nothing. She had complete collapse of her liver. The entire liver was collapsed. You couldn't see a single normal hepatocyte. You couldn't see scar tissue. You couldn't see anything except collapse. So I thought, well, this lady's going to die. There's no way she can make it. She was only 32 years old, maybe. So I kept her in the hospital weeks. She got better and better and better. She got discharged, and she went home with normal liver tests.
She couldn't drink alcohol in the hospital.
She did not. We took away the insult. There's the key. So in the liver,
Which, one second before you go on, which is strikingly similar, Dr. Hutson, based upon your review of the medical records, in terms of the patients getting better off of real water and drinking the hospital water.
exactly same analogy. You take away the insult, your liver has a chance to get better. We see it with alcohol all the time, and the same thing happened with hydrazine.
Now, this is where I want the jury to focus, and I want you to explain it to them. Your story just gave, I guess, a description of a miracle of this lady's completely failed or necrotic liver. So the liver can recover from necrosis, but when it comes to fibrosis, you said that's scarring.
That's correct.
Is it more difficult to recover from the scarring than it is necrotic insult?
Yes,
And explain why.
totally different thing. So the lady I told you about, I biopsied her again a year later because I wanted to see, is she going to die or what's going to happen? Her liver had completely recovered because she never drank alcohol that entire time. Insult was taken away. She was a miracle. All right, and I've seen lots of miracles in my day. I believe in miracles. I've seen them too many times. Now, scarring, getting back to what Mr. Parker was talking about, what I expected to see in that patient was a whole lot of scarring. And that would have been a death knell for her, because once you get this kind of scarring and more, so cirrhosis looks different than this. Cirrhosis is sort of circular scars throughout the liver, and that's irreversible. That's stage 4 fibrosis, irreversible. Most of the time, this is stage 2 to 3. That's pretty bad. Once in a while, you'll see an improvement in this, but lots of times this doesn't get better. So fibrosis is scarring that is very different than necrosis. Necrosis is dead cells. They can recover, and that's why I gave you the example of the young 32-year-old lady. But when you have this, she didn't have this. She didn't have any scarring, so she recovered. This person, we don't know what she's going to do. This is one of the Loma Linda cases. Again, we don't know whether she's going to end up doing well throughout her life or whether she's going to end up with cirrhosis.
And so let's apply that approach or that logic or that medicine to these plaintiffs. Hydrazine caused scarring based upon the slides you're looking at, correct?
That is correct.
Does that also mean, Dr. Hutson, that same hydrazine could have scarred the plaintiffs here?
Yes,
Their
sir.
livers?
Yes, sir.
Now, based upon your review of the medical records, is it true that Mr. James Hugh had a liver biopsy?
That is correct.
Is it also true that Kathleen Ryerson had a liver biopsy?
She did before her death.
And is it, based upon your review of those records, is it consistent with both Mr. Hugh and Ms. Ryerson, their livers being injured as a result of consumption or drinking of hydrazine?
Yes, sir. They were both severely injured.
All right. Let me have you take a stand one more time. If you could go back to the first page of the Loma Linda report, please. Now, one other thing I wanted to have you discuss with me about this report, Dr. Hutson. Go up a little bit for me, Shane. Right about there, stop. It indicates here that Real Water started with 5 hospitalized pediatric cases of acute non-viral hepatitis of unknown etiology. You see that?
That's correct.
Can you highlight that for me, Shane? It's in the middle. There we go. Now, do you recall those 5 patients? Not by name, but the actual incident?
I do, and it's interesting, as I've told you and the jury, I was in Utah for many years, so I actually knew the hepatologist who saw these kids. Now, he didn't call me and tell me this, but I sort of found out through the grapevine, something was going on. And then when I took over this case, started doing this case with you guys, I learned more about it. And so I learned of these young kids, 5 of them that had all developed acute liver injury or acute liver failure. They were all transferred from here to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City because they have a liver transplant program, pediatric liver transplant program. It's very good, by the way, for liver transplant. They were thought that when they were sent from here, everybody thought they were going to need liver transplants. They were that sick.
Now, did you know that, or is it your understanding that Orion Gallagher was one of the 5?
Yes.
And you know Ms. Camille Gallagher right here? You've spoken to her.
Yes.
Now, let's go to the second page of this report. And the second page of this report towards the top, can you highlight duration on the second line, Shane? Perfect. These are 4 patients the slides are referring to, correct? That we looked at earlier?
Correct.
It indicates that on patient number 1, they were drinking real water for just 2 weeks.
Correct.
Is it your understanding that hydrazine is such a hepatotoxic item or toxin that with just 2 weeks of consumption, it can cause that type of liver damage?
Yes, sir, and that was really shown in some of the really older literature where hydrazine has been studied in the 70s and 80s, looking at rats and monkeys. And they showed that even short durations of hydrazine consumption could cause liver damage.
And so for a long time, it's been known that hydrazine is a toxin and can cause liver damage?
Yes, sir.
Now I want to go to exhibit number 90. This is the CDC.
It's not been admitted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't put it up yet. Did you review the CDC document titled Unusual Hepatitis Outbreak Linked to a Brand of Alkaline Bottled Water?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did you use that document as a part of your evaluation of this case?
I did.
And did this document play a role in the opinions you ultimately concluded?
Yes, sir.
All right, I move for the admission of Exhibit 90. I'm only going to look at page 20. I don't think there's any, I didn't think there'd be an opposition, just in case.
No objection.
No objection.
No objection.
We'll grant the request.
Thank you. Could you put the first page on? So do you recognize this, this article?
Yes, sir.
What I want you to do is go to page 20 of this document, Shane. So what does this list represent, Dr. Hutson?
These are drugs that are potential hepatotoxins.
And would most hepatologists, most doctors be aware that these drugs would have a negative effect on the liver?
On some people. Right.
Now, I see that hydrazine is identified here.
That's correct.
And has this drug or this toxin, were you aware of it being dangerous or potentially a potential cause of liver failure?
I was, just in my general knowledge and general reading, I'd never, encountered a patient with hydrazine toxicity. But, as a hepatologist, you kind of have to know this long list of drugs, or at least be familiar with it. So I was familiar with hydrazine being on that list.
Right. Let's go to Exhibit 6, please. I believe this has been pre-admitted, Your Honor. It's the FDA summary report.
It's admitted.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Now, did you review this report as well, Dr. Hutson?
Yes, sir, I did.
And this is the second report, but it's the third sample test performed by the FDA of the real water concentrate. Were you aware of that?
That is right. This was an additional test beyond the other two you just showed.
If you could go to page 9. And if you could highlight the second paragraph right about in the middle, it says, the words using and then gases next. You see it? And go all the way to, you get to 1.33. Doctor, would you read that into record? The highlighted portion.
Using gas chromatography mass spectrometry and high-performance liquid chromatography with ultraviolet detection, hydrazine was identified based on retention time and spectral comparison to its standard. Using HPLC-UV, the concentration of hydrazine was determined to be 1.33 plus or minus 0.04 milligrams per milliliter.
And Doctor, based upon your experience, is it this hydrazine contained in the concentrate of real water that caused the plaintiff's acute liver failure?
Yes, it is.
And then finally, if we could look at Exhibit 7.
Yes, this one.
It's a-
This is 3 minutes.
Which one?
Did you review the Eurofins report?
Yes, sir, I did.
And is it your understanding that as a part of this report, 7 real water retail bottles were tested?
Yes.
And based upon your review of this report, let's go to page 8 to start. And we got sample 1 through 6 on page 8, and I believe the remaining sample reports are on page 9. So we'll start with page 8. Based upon your review of this report, were varying degrees of hydrazine found in each bottle?
Yes, sir, there was.
It's my understanding, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, that samples 1 and 2 detected hydrazine, but they were below the reporting quantity, is that correct?
That is correct. Detected but not measurable by the methods they were using, which was gas chromatography.
Okay. And of the other 5, were those all measured?
Yes, sir, they were all measurable.
And given your review of this document, does it support your conclusions that real water contained hydrazine, specifically both in the concentrate and derivatively in the retail bottles?
Yes, sir, this shows that.
And does it also support your conclusions that each of the plaintiffs, including the death of Ms. Ryerson, was caused by their consumption of the real water, be it the retail bottles or the 5-gallon jugs?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And just to summarize and as a demonstrative, we've gone through, let's go through all of your opinions. Okay. So opinion number 1 is that James Hugh developed acute liver failure secondary or caused by the consumption of real water. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is your opinion the same for Mr. Belsky?
It is.
Is it the same for Ms. Ryerson?
Yes, it is.
Is it the same for Mr. Haley?
Yes, it is.
Is it the same for Ms. Arnone?
Yes.
And by the way, Ms. Arnone was facing a liver transplant at UCLA. Is that correct?
That's correct. She was so sick here that she was transferred to UCLA and was almost listed for liver transplant, and then she turned around at the last minute.
And it's my understanding, Doctor, that Orion Gallagher was very close to a liver transplant as well.
Orion Gallagher missed a liver transplant by a hair. He was an extremely sick baby. He had swollen up with ascites, he had turned yellow, he wouldn't respond, he couldn't feed, he couldn't eat because his brain he had encephalopathy, which is the toxins don't get cleared by the liver. And that kid, he almost died.
Now, one thing that we've not talked about, but all the jurors have heard this from the plaintiffs, what's the typical symptomology when you're suffering from acute liver failure?
Well, the symptoms are variable, but typically people will come in with jaundice, okay, so yellow. They'll have markedly elevated liver tests. They'll oftentimes come in with encephalopathy. That's the confusion I was speaking about a minute ago, because ammonia builds up in your bloodstream, the liver can't clear it, and it goes to your brain. So people get confused, and sometimes they get so confused they lapse into a coma. And Orion was in a coma for a short period of time, as I recall correctly. So those are some of the symptoms. People can get abdominal pain. They can swell up with a large amount of ascites. Orion had that. They can develop nausea and vomiting. And they usually have anorexia. Anorexia means no appetite, so they don't eat. And those are some of the many symptoms that you can see with acute liver failure.
And so your opinion would be the same with Orion Gallagher?
That is correct.
And Mr. Batiste?
Mr. Batiste as well.
Now, beyond those conclusions, have you come to any conclusions in terms of any other etiology, any other cause other than hydrazine?
You know, every one of these patients underwent an intense and extensive and exhaustive evaluation at every institution that they were seen in. And in particular, the liver transplant institutions, which are even, you know, more really probing than other community hospitals, but they all had all the extensive testing. And there was no other cause for these patients to develop acute liver failure or acute liver injury.
Hydrazine is the only cause.
Hydrazine is the only cause, sir.
Let's go to summary of your opinion number 9. So you've described what DILI is, drug-induced liver injury. And I believe you, in your evaluation, discussed the Loma Linda publication we've talked about, but give a little more insight to the jury about this opinion.
Well, you know, when I was sort of telling you guys about the changes and showing you up on the slides, I kind of really wanted to emphasize that blue part on the slide, the scarring, because that's what really worries me about all of these patients that are sitting here and those that aren't sitting here. What is the future? You know, none of us can predict how much scarring they have. Maybe they have no scarring. We know that 2 of the patients at Loma Linda had significant scarring. So we don't know about my people out here. But my concern is that since we don't know, there's the possibility that some of them, one of them, all of them may have scarring already. The only way to prove that to any significant degree is a liver biopsy. And we're not going to biopsy a liver when you have normal liver tests. Okay, you can't justify it because there's a risk of bleeding. Not a big risk of bleeding, but you can't just biopsy and say, well, I want to see what's going on. You really can't do that. And all of our patients' liver tests have returned to normal. There is another test called a shear wave elastography, which is a non-invasive test, which means no biopsy or anything, that can sometimes be used to look and see if there's fibrosis of the liver. And it might not be a bad idea if that's done, you know, along the way somewhere. But my concern is we don't know what's going to happen to each one of these people as time goes on. Will they do great? I hope they do great. I hope every single one of them does great and never has a problem and never has another issue with their liver. I pray to God that that's what happens. But what if it doesn't? What if some of these guys end up with advanced fibrosis like that Loma Linda patient on the right-hand side with all the blue? And they go on to progress to cirrhosis and need a liver transplant.
And let me stop you there for 1 second, Dr. Hutson. Of the 4 patients that were part of the Loma Linda study, 2 of the 4 had scarring.
That's correct. 2 had scarring, 2 did not.
That's right. And are you suggesting that for the future of these patients, these plaintiffs, that some form of liver function test would be appropriate to monitor their condition going forward?
Yes, sir.
And is that typically once a year, twice a year? How often would you do it?
I think since these guys experienced such a severe problem and ending up in the hospital and almost needing liver transplants for a couple, that twice a year they should have liver function tests drawn and possibly even more. I mentioned to you guys about elastography. You know, should we be looking for fibrosis in these patients early on? There's no good guidance out there from any of the societies that I belong to about what we should do about that. So there's nothing I can rely on from a document that says, well, when you have acute liver failure, you should follow these people, you know, for looking fibrosis. It's just we don't know. So maybe we should be. Maybe this is something I should be doing in all my acute liver failure patients along the way. But there's not good guidance. But I do worry.
All right. And in terms of that, the additional liver function test, the ALT and AST getting checked, and the MRI you were speaking of, the elastography.
Elastography.
Yep. That each of these plaintiffs could do that, of course, except from Ryerson. But that can be handled here, doesn't have to go to a special center or anything to do that,
That
correct?
is correct.
All right,
Yeah,
perfect.
blood testing can be done anywhere, and I'm sure that probably 1 or 2 hospitals here in the Las Vegas area has elastography, at least 1 or 2.
All right. And that's the price tag of that is fairly reasonable, is that
It's
correct?
very reasonable.
On average, what are you talking a year?
About $200 for the elastography, and that would have to not be done more than once a year. There's no reason to do it more often than that. Blood test, $40, $50,
All right.
twice a year.
Thank you. Now, your next opinion, we've discussed this. I just want to summarize it. Go to the next one, Shane. You reviewed the Southern Nevada Health District records, correct?
I did.
And did the Southern Nevada Health District also identify that these cases of hepatic toxicity and liver failure were related to consumption of your water?
They did. And they identified other cases as well.
All right. And finally, did the FDA, the next one, did the FDA, based upon its testing and Eurofins testing, which are separate, did both testing results find hydrazine in to some degree, in every test performed?
They did.
In your final opinion, Dr. Hutson, was the medical care received by all of the plaintiffs here related to their acute liver failure, and then, of course, the death of Ms. Ryerson, was that all related to their consumption of real water?
All related to consumption of real water.
And you give all of those opinions, all the ones you offered, to a reasonable degree of medical probability or certainty?
Yes, sir, I do.
I think that's all I have. Thank you so much. I'll pass the witness.
Your Honors, now we time for break.
Wait. I had 1 or 2 questions. You guys take a break?
I guess it depends on how long you're gonna go.
I'll go about 2 minutes maybe.
Right?
I'm going to go.
We're gonna stopwatch that again.
Ryder.
Shane, can I have number 9 back, please?
Wait a second. Wait 1 second. Dr. Hutson, I made one mistake. Orion Gallagher did not go in 2020. I believe she went in 2019.
That is correct.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead.
Number 9, patient Mr. Yu, James Yu, correct?
Yes,
And he had a liver biopsy,
he did.
and you reviewed Dr. Vatnow's report,
I did.
and James Yu had scarring as well, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
He did.
So out of the 5 liver biopsies, we have 4 at Loma Linda and 1 at Mr. Yu. 3 of them show permanent liver scarring.
And don't forget, Mrs. Ryerson had a liver biopsy before she died, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, help me with math. That would be
6.
4 out of 3, 4.
Three out of the 6, right?
Yeah. 4 at Loma Linda,
For Loma Linda. And
that's
Ryerson,
2 out of 2.
right? And who?
Mr. Yu, 1 of 1, and Ryerson. Okay, so that would be 1 of 1. So that's 4 out of the 6 people that had liver biopsy, or that had liver biopsies had scarring.
Yes, sir.
66%,
Yes, sir.
more likely than not.
Yes, sir.
So it's more likely than not that people who drank real water with hydrazine in it have permanent injury in the liver scarring.
That is possible.
Thank you.
Might be a good time for a break.
That's what we're gonna do, Mr. Odou.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're admonished not to converse amongst yourselves or with anyone else on any subject of the trial, or to read, watch, or listen to the report or commentary on the trial by any person connected to this case, or by any medium of information, including without limitations, newspaper, television, radio, remember the social media prohibition. And last but not least, do not form or express any opinion on any subject connected to this trial and to the cause that's finally submitted to you. Ms. Marshall.
All rise for the court to adjourn. Jury is clear. Please be seated. Thank you.
No, I'm good, bro. Thank you, bro.
Farm 16, I'll come back. Please.
Judge, there's one exhibit that was submitted, I told Mr. Odou somebody to be redacted in it. And I had one more question for you, it's a jury question.
Yeah, we do. We have a jury question.
So on the exhibit that was admitted, offered and admitted was plaintiff's exhibit 90. That was a 52-page exhibit from the Southern Nevada Health District. And page 48 of 52 references the Department of Justice complaint injunction against Stillwater. So what we'll need to do is remove this page, reprint the rest of the exhibit, so that will be the new exhibit 90, which I'll bring on Tuesday. I just want to clarify that for the record, so we don't inadvertently admit this to the jury.
Agreed.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Oh, yeah, we can.
Hey, Will?
And we have one question. Panelist for jury number 1. Well, how long does a person expected to live after acute liver failure?
I think it's a fair question.
I think it's a fair question, I don't have a problem.
No objection.
How you answer that question, there's quite a few variables.
Yeah, that might be it, the last variable.
I think that would be issues.
I like to have the questions answered when possible, so I have no objection.
Yeah, I mean, I would too. So we'll ask it. All right, anything else?
No, Your Honor. I got 2 seconds with you, Your Honor.
Bench conference?
So.
Oh, hold on.
So, lastly, are we ready to bring?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Everyone's in agreement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Robbins?
Yes, Your Honor.
Bring them in.
Okay, the doctor back in the suite?
Yes. Are you in Charleston, Doctor?
I live in Morgantown.
No.
Yes, sir.
Oh. That's Virginia. People forget about the tri-state area, how close it is to Pittsburgh and all those things.
Well, you know, Pittsburgh is like an hour away from us, so it's, you know, everything's close.
Yes.
And then you're not doing the Raiders Center?
I am not rooting for the Rangers, sorry.
Razors?
Well, that's the second point.
Of course not, you called it Nevada.
There you go.
Leave our expert alone.
I'll get it wrong again.
Get that taser.
You would think I would get it right, because I've been in Utah all those years.
That's all right.
I got another.
Actually, you
Store for your office.
Dude, these are all mine. Oh my God.
You still say one?
No. And actually, you know, from Chicago, they say it right.
They do?
Yes, Nevada.
Okay.
So is it natural, right?
It's the accent, it's the egg.
They do not say it right on the East Coast. I went to the University of Maryland.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
But you trying to say that.
in the job. You're right, and I should remember, but I've been back east for 12 years.
Wow.
See, I was at Maryland and now WV, so in Maryland, it's what, Nevada?
Nevada, yeah.
All the John Wayne movies.
That's right.
All right, so adjourned. Please,
Parties issued us eight, right? You should review it.
yes, Your Honor.
Is that what Dan Lady is doing? I got you. I'm gonna let you go. I'm just holding it because I want to forget. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Doctor, you told the jury that it costs approximately $400 or $500 to do the function test,
$40 to $50.
okay? And that's in your jurisdiction,
Yes.
okay? And if the medical records, first of all, what's a metabolic panel?
A metabolic panel would include a lot more than liver function test. It includes all your electrolytes and renal function as well.
Okay. And if the medical records in this case show that the liver function test in this jurisdiction costs, Nevada costs a little more than what it does back where you're from, do you know if that's the case or not?
I would accept that. It probably costs more here.
Okay, so whatever's in the medical records.
Whatever's in the medical record, yes.
Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Dr. Hutson, thank you for traveling to Nevada. We appreciate it.
Veterans, I don't have a lot of questions. Exhibit 6, where it's at, who has it? So the FDA. You reviewed this entire report.
I did.
Did you see any mention of an ORP meter?
No.
You know what an ORP meter is?
It's what was used in order to test the real water,
Measure what?
to measure the alkalinity.
Measure so can it measure alkalinity or does it measure electric voltage?
Well, I guess it measures electric voltage per se, but indirectly alkalinity and acidity of the water.
Does pH also measure alkalinity?
It does.
Do you believe it's foreseeable that the I won't even ask that. Do you believe that a bottled water company would ever put hydrazine in water?
On purpose?
And unintentionally, or ever?
I don't think anybody would do it intentionally, but it happened here.
It did. Do you believe that a bottled water company, a good bottled water company, in your opinion, would have?
You know, he's beyond the scope. He's a medical causation expert.
I'll sustain.
Thank you.
Have you ever used an ORP meter?
Never.
Back to Exhibit 6. The FDA used something called a mass spectrometer. Do you know what that is?
I do.
What does that do?
Well, mass spectrometer does many different things. So it's in a basic science laboratory, basically, and it measures compounds, it measures the, well, it's a mass spectrometer, so it does a wavelength thing. On this, they use an ultraviolet type thing. Now, I'm not an expert in this at all, but just being in the medical school, we have mass spectrometers in some of the basic science labs, and they use it to measure compounds and the amounts of compounds in certain substances.
Could you tell the jury what you mean by the word compound?
Well, compound can be anything. Compound can be a medication, or compound can be a foreign object that shouldn't be in there. Like, let's say, would be a good example of a compound? Hydrazine. Hydrazine's a compound, right? So you would pick that up with a mass spectrometer.
I had a question for just off the kind of on topic. Does the liver regenerate?
The liver does regenerate, as long as it's not scarred.
So scarring prevents regeneration?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I have.
Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor.
No questions.
No further question.
All right. Anyway, Doctor, before we let you go, we have one question from Will Kemp. And that's, and the question is, quote, how long does a person expect to live after acute liver injury?
Well, it would be variable, but I would expect a person, as long as they have no scarring, that they'll live a normal life, a normal lifespan. If they have scarring, then all bets are off.
And based on the previous testimony, 60% of the people that had the biopsies had scarring.
In our section, in our selection, yes, sir.
66.6%.
Yes, sir.
Will do for real water. Based on the scarring, you recommended future medical monitoring. Is that correct?
I do.
And the cost of that obviously is different from West Virginia to Las Vegas.
It is.
Thank you.
All right. Is that it? Okay, Doctor, you're released.
Thank you, Doc.
All right, Mr. Pepperman.
Well, court's indulgence, Your Honor. Your Honor, I have as a new exhibit 702-0003 a copy of Mr. Botiz's medical record, which shows the costs in this jurisdiction of the metabolic testing testified to by Dr. Hutson. And so we would move for admission of this medical record for that purpose. Comprehensive metabolic panel.
Your Honor, I think we can deal with this off the record or out of the presence and come to an agreement. But I have an objection to this moment. I just need to chat with counsel.
Okay, that's fine, as long as we're able to discuss it afterward.
Make sure you remind me.
Yes, sir.
We will remember and we will talk about it. Thank you.
Okay. So next step will be?
Your Honor, next up, plaintiff's called Camille Gallagher.
Please watch your stories you send me. You stand up, please, Madam Clerk.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
May I have you state and spell your name for the record?
Camille Gallagher, Gallagher.
Thank you.
Please. Sit down.
And Your Honor, before we begin, I think to save time, we have some stipulations on some exhibits. The first is the new exhibit 670. It is one page. It's a medical record for Orion Gallagher.
We do, Your Honor. Just want to make a note of that. 670.
Thank you.
The next one is the new exhibit 671, also medical records for Orion Gallagher.
Okay, how many pages?
This one is 6 pages.
No objection. Okay. No objection. No objection. Shall be admitted, sir.
The next one is the new exhibit 678, which are medical records for Orion Gallagher. And it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 pages.
No objection.
No objection. No objection. Shall be admitted next to none.
The next will be the new exhibit 18, which are photos. Nine pages.
No objection.
No
No objection.
Shall be admitted.
And the last is the new exhibit 19, which is a 1-page photo.
Okay.
No objection.
Shall be admitted.
Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, Camille.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Hanging in there.
Let's introduce you to the jury. How long have you lived in Las Vegas?
I've been here my whole life. I was born here.
And how many children do you and Ryan have?
We have 2 boys, 4 and 5 years old.
What are their names?
Our oldest is Iseer, and our youngest is Orion, who we'll be talking about today.
What is Orion's birthday?
It is January 7th, 2019.
When did your family first start drinking real water?
I think it was approximately around June of 2019.
And did you get home delivery?
We did.
I have some of the exhibits that we have as PowerPoint to just kind of show the jury as we go. Is this a photograph of Orion at the real water 5-gallon dispenser?
Yes, it is. He was just learning how to pull himself up at that point.
At the time that you started getting real water home delivery in June of 2019, Orion would have been around 5 months old?
He was born in January, so yes.
At that age, were you primarily bottle feeding Orion?
For the most part, yes, with formula. I had breastfed him a little bit, but mostly with formula.
And 5 months, that's about around the time you start introducing solid food, is that right?
If I remember correctly, there may have been some.
And what did you use to make Orion's formula?
We used the real water.
And did you exclusively use the real water, the water in your home to make the formula?
Pretty much, as far as I can remember, we bought those big 5-gallon jugs, so that's what we used.
And did there come a time when Orion started to get sick?
There did. It was early September of 2019. He was 7 months old. He ended up turning 8 months old in the hospital. The symptoms that we noticed was he was very lethargic, just sleeping a lot, and he started throwing up. I remember picking him up from my mom's house, and she was concerned about him. She said that he looked a little green around the gills, and she suggested that I should take him to a quick care.
And is that what you did?
That's what I did. So I took him to the quick care. There, they diagnosed him with 2 ear infections. They said that his right was worse than his left, but they seemed genuinely perplexed as to why he was throwing up. He did not have flu, he didn't have a fever. I remember the doctor palpating his little belly and kind of had a furrowed brow and looking concerned. And he said, well, if it keeps happening, take him to the emergency room.
And what kind of throwing up was it? Is it the kind of throwing up that a baby does after feeding, or was it something more serious?
It was more serious, and by the next morning, he was full on projectile vomiting. He couldn't keep anything down. So then I knew, okay, something's up. So I took him to Henderson Hospital. They had a NICU nurse come in, and she drew some blood on him. I remember her saying that babies' veins, their little arms are kind of chubby, so it's hard to get an IV in there. So he had a prominent vein in his forehead, so she used that one to get an IV in there. And she had made the comment that he looked jaundiced. And I remember thinking, why would he be jaundiced? I mean, he's past that point. I know I've heard of newborns being jaundiced, but a 7, almost 8-month-old, it just wasn't making any sense.
I'm going to show the jurors the photos here. These are the side-by-side photos, and it looks like the cotton swab over his arm where they weren't able to take the blood, and then is that where they placed the line in his forehead?
Yes, that was for the IV.
And did they use this to do blood work at Henderson Hospital?
They didn't draw blood from the head, that was from the arm, but they did draw the blood, and the doctor looked at the results. He came in and he said, his liver enzymes are really high, and we don't know how to treat this. So we're gonna either send you to St. Rose or Sunrise Children's Hospital. And so then it was determined that he would have to go to Sunrise.
So up on the screen, we have a medical record from the Henderson Hospital blood work, and the 4 numbers are the bilirubin, which was 4.7, when the median's about 0.5. High alkaline phosphate number, 2244. And then the last 2 are his ASTs and ALTs, 1976 and 951. These are the numbers that the doctor told you were very high.
Yes, and he referred to the liver enzymes.
And so what happened next? They said they can't treat him. Where did you go next?
So because he had already been admitted into the hospital, they needed to transport him by ambulance to Sunrise. And so I got in my car, I zipped over there, I beat them there. I was waiting for them to arrive. The paramedic came in, they had a little gurney, they had his little car seat with him inside. I think the paramedic was trying to be reassuring and told me he was a good little baby on the ride over, he didn't cry or anything like that. And he asked me, is there anything different about his behavior that you notice? And no sooner did those words leave his mouth that I look at my son and his little jaw drops open and his eyes kind of flutter in back of his head. And he starts like shaking. And I go, that's not normal. The nurse turns around, she takes one look at him and goes, he's seizing. Everybody starts rushing in. It just felt surreal. I was in shock. Yelling out medical jargon, we need this and that milligram stat. Remember there was a doctor on the phone saying that we have a gravely ill patient. It was just chaos.
Next up, we have a medical record from Sunrise, and it references this seizure. It says that he had a 7-minute tonic-clonic seizure. Did you witness the entire 7 minutes?
Yes, at that point in time stood still. It must have been that long, but they eventually got it under control. They admitted him into the hospital, and then that night is when we were told he was in liver failure, and there was nothing they could do for him. He had to be sent to another hospital, and that was either going to be in California or in Utah. So this was what, third place. First it was the quick care, they couldn't help him. Then it was Henderson Hospital, they couldn't help him. Then it was Sunrise, and they couldn't help him. So the next step was to go out of state.
This is the last page from the discharge note at Sunrise. Says this patient has a critical illness that requires constant monitoring and titration of care by a pediatric intensivist. Failure to provide this level of care may result in further organ system dysfunction or death. Is this what they told you at Sunrise?
Yes.
Where did they tell you that Orion needed to go to get this type of critical care?
So he was going to have to be emergency flown up to Children's Primary Care in Salt Lake City, Utah, where they specialized in the liver care.
And were you able to travel with Orion to Primary Children's Hospital?
Yes, I was. My husband had to figure out what to do with our oldest boy, so he ended up staying with a family member in Arizona. But I did. I believe that night, around like 11 o'clock, we boarded a little plane and we flew out there. I think we arrived around 3 or 4 in the morning.
Is on the screen a picture of the Flight for Life to Pediatric Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City?
Yes, it is. If you look up in that upper right-hand corner, there's a little window there. You can kind of see his reflection. That's his little ear. That little blanket we still have. I remember for some reason they weren't letting him eat. I remember he had like a little binky. They had to put some like sugar droplets on it to kind of give him the sensation of hip sucking, to kind of hold him over while we were in transport to the hospital.
Is this a picture of Orion upon your arrival at Primary Children's Hospital?
Yes, yes. We moved him into, I think it was a regular room at first. They were monitoring his cognitive level and his alertness. So what I understand, in liver failure patients, something happens called hepatic encephalopathy, which Dr. Hutson had mentioned earlier, where dangerous amounts of ammonia that the liver normally cycles out of the body go to the brain. And in adults, it can cause episodes of severe confusion. In babies and children, it usually manifests as tiredness, sleepiness. And so I remember them giving him a little rattle, and he's moving it, and he was a little interested in it, and he'd shake it a little bit, but then he would kind of pass back out. And at one point, the nurse that had been tending to him, I remember she walked outside the room, and I looked at her. I was watching her, and she walked out. She didn't see me looking at her. And she looked at someone outside the room. She kind of put her head down, looked down at the ground, and kind of shook her head side to side, as if to say, you know, not good. And it was shortly thereafter that he was moved to the PICU. That's the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. That's where the sickest of the sickest go.
Dr. Hutson, when you testified earlier, also mentioned about the swelling in liver failure patients. Was Orion suffering from this type of swelling?
Absolutely, he was. And that swelling is called ascites. Some people pronounce it ascites. It's spelled A-S-C-I-T-E-S. And it's where the peritoneal cavity, which is basically all the space around your internal organs in your abdomen, they fill up with fluid. And I'm not quite sure where that fluid comes from, but it distends the belly. I know in adult patients, sometimes it becomes necessary to do a procedure called a pericentesis, where they actually have to extract the fluid out. Fortunately, in Orion's case, they didn't have to do that. His body was able to absorb that fluid, but that did happen with him, yes.
And did he, so he had the swelling in the belly, and then his face looks to be a little swollen as well.
Yes, the edema, very much so. It was to the point he couldn't even open his eyes.
At what point do they move him to the pediatric intensive care unit?
So I think when he was not trending well, and the hepatic encephalopathy was getting worse, and the next step from that is coma. So that's when they brought him down to the pediatric intensive care unit. And this entire time, I'm trying to keep it together. I'm trying to put a brave face. I'm staving off feelings of panic and despair and hopelessness. This is my child. I have to be strong for him. I can't give in to defeat. But at that point, I just broke down. I couldn't keep it together anymore. And that's when the doctors came in, the hepatologist, the specialist, sit down with me, told me liver transplantation is what we have to do to save his life.
On the screen, can you tell the jury what this is a photo of?
So that's little Orion. I believe that's when we were in the PICU. Prior to this, he had been laying in a little hospital crib. And then when we got down there, it was interesting. The nurses allowed me to pick him up and hold him. And I don't know if it was just me, but that kind of felt like maybe because that was the last time I might be holding him.
Prior to being in the PICU at Children's Primary Hospital, you typically were allowed to be by his side, but not able to hold him?
From what I remember, yes, I remember he had to be in the little hospital crib with all of his tubes hooked up to him and everything.
Could you tell the jury what this document is on the screen?
Acknowledgement form, yes. So this was the consent form. I believe my husband was still driving up after dropping off our older boy. He was on his way. They took me into another room to sign the forms to move forward, the liver transplantation. I remember I had my husband on the phone. I'm reading it to him. I'm moving forward. I'm signing the signatures, whatever that needed to be done. I know it's a life-changing surgery for sure. They have to be on anti-rejection meds the rest of their lives. And to have a transplant at such a young age, you might need one later in life. And so it certainly was a very serious thing to move forward with, but at that point, it's either that or die, so we had to do it.
Can you please tell the jury what this document is?
So this was saying that he was a candidate for liver transplant. As a matter of fact, he was moved up to number 1.
So they shuffle you into the room and they tell you this is what a liver transplant is, this is what he needs to save his life, this is what the rest of his life is going to look like. Sign this consent, we're moving him to 1A on the list.
Absolutely. And I'm like, let's go. Let's do whatever we have to do.
What happened next?
So, if I remember correctly, my husband arrived on Children's Primary. They're a great hospital. They're very accommodating to the families. The nurses would come in, they would give me snacks and things, and they would tell me, he's in good hands. You go to the cafeteria and get something to eat. I'm one of those people when I'm stressed, I'm not interested in food. I didn't want to leave his side, but when my husband came, I felt better about going to the little private room and trying to get some sleep. I remember I'm laying in there and I'm on my phone Googling liver failure in 7-month-old and nothing's coming up, there's no causes. At this point, the official diagnosis was acute idiopathic hepatic failure, meaning that the liver had failed suddenly, no one knew why. So I'm grappling with this, trying to understand why is this happening, just knowing like the only way forward was the liver transplant. And so the next morning I go in to check on my son, and his edema has gone down. His swelling has gone down. His eyes are open. He seems more alert. The doctors started coming in, and they said, well, let's hold off on this liver transplant. His blood work is actually looking better. And
Prior to that point, was the liver transplant scheduled? Was there a available organ?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually were offered an organ. They had one ready to go. And so we accepted and we're ready to move forward. until the next day when we were informed that his blood work was actually looking better.
And what happened next?
And from there, a miracle happened. Slowly but surely, one tube at a time, whatever medical device was taken off of him, until the only thing that remained was a little oxygen tube under his nose. And the doctors finally took that off, and then they watched him. They just monitored him to see, okay, what's he gonna do?
And eventually, were you able to go home?
We were. So after about 4 days, we were able to go back home. We had to follow up with a pediatric gastroenterologist for a while. She has since released him from her care. Everything seems okay. We're hoping, knock on wood. I remember the first time Orion got sick after this whole ordeal. He threw up and I went, oh God, it's back. I rushed him back to Sunrise. Thankfully, they said it wasn't liver failure that time, it was a flu or something. But you live with that fear every day. Could this come back? His liver has been compromised.
You heard Dr. Hutson testify that there is a more probable than not chance that there is permanent scarring and recommends liver monitoring to try to intervene early.
Absolutely.
Is that something that you intend to do with Orion?
Absolutely. Yes, I know when we first arrived at the hospital, they were doing a bunch of tests and they were using an ultrasound, and at one point they were very concerned about his portal vein.
How's Orion today?
Orion is a happy, healthy, almost 5-year-old boy. So far, so good. We take him in regularly for his checkups. He doesn't seem to be having any problems at this time.
What's it like when he gets sick?
Yeah, that's worrisome. Like I said, the first time after that whole ordeal when he threw up, and I immediately thought it had something to do with the liver. Because once you go through something like this, it's impossible to forget.
Thank you, Camille. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you.